My son took out a $200,000 loan in my name to finance his wife's luxurious lifestyle, designer handbags, jewelry, and travel. I, a pensioner with a modest apartment, discovered a forged signature and betrayal that broke my heart. Now they regret it, begging for forgiveness. But it's too late to undo what I've done. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The number $200,000 stared back at me from the bank statement, but I'd never seen this loan before in my life. My reading glasses slipped down my nose as I squinted at the document again, hoping the morning light through my small kitchen window was playing tricks on me. The envelope still lay torn open beside my coffee cup, the First National Bank letterhead crisp and official. Everything looked legitimate: my name, my address, even what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. But I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't applied for any loan. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the paper over, searching for some explanation, some fine print that would make sense of this nightmare. The loan origination date showed March 1st, 2025, just 2 weeks ago. Monthly payments of $108.47 were already overdue. I needed answers. The phone felt heavier than usual as I dialed the customer service number printed at the top of the statement. Each ring echoed in my quiet apartment, amplifying the growing knot in my stomach. First National Bank Customer Service. This is Jennifer. How may I assist you today? Yes, I'm calling about a loan that appears on my account. Robert Anderson, account ending in 4729. Of course, Mr. Anderson, let me pull up your file. I see the personal loan for $200,000 was approved on March the 1st. Is there something specific you need help with? The room seemed to tilt slightly. There must be some mistake. I never applied for this loan. A pause. Sir, I'm showing the application was submitted online with your Social Security number and digital signature verification. The funds were deposited into your checking account on March 2nd. That's impossible. My voice cracked slightly. I never received any deposit. My account balance has been the same for months. Let me check something else. Oh, I see. The funds were transferred to a joint account holder the same day. Brian Anderson. My son's name hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white against the black plastic. Mr. Anderson, are you still there? Yes, I whispered. Can you tell me more about this transfer? The entire loan amount was moved to Mr. Brian Anderson's personal account within hours of the deposit. He's listed as an authorized user on your account from, let me see, 5 years ago when you added him for emergency purposes. The walls of my small apartment felt like they were closing in. Brian had access to my account for emergencies only. I trusted him completely. Added him after his mother died, so he could help with my banking if I ever became ill. Sir, is everything all right? Do you need to report fraudulent activity? My mouth went dry. Fraudulent activity. My own son had stolen from me, forged my signature, taken out a massive loan in my name. $200,000 that I would never be able to repay on my small pension. Mr. Anderson, I need to call you back. I hung up before she could respond, my hand shaking as I set the phone down. The silence in my apartment felt deafening now, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on my kitchen wall. Brian had betrayed me. My own son had looked at his elderly father and seen nothing but an opportunity to steal. The realization burned in my chest, a mixture of heartbreak and rage that I hadn't felt since his mother's death. I stared at the loan document again, at the forged signature that looked so much like mine. He'd practiced it, planned it, executed it with cold precision. While I'd been worrying about making ends meet on my pension, he'd been plotting to destroy my financial security. The anger began to build, starting as a small flame and growing into something much larger. 37 years of supporting him, helping him through college, bailing him out of every financial mistake. And this was how he repaid me. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady, and walked to the window. Outside, Spokane looked the same as always. Quiet streets, modest homes, ordinary people living ordinary lives. But my world had just shattered completely. The 27-minute drive to Brian's house felt like hours. Every traffic light gave me more time to rehearse what I'd say, to imagine his face when I confronted him with the truth. My old Honda struggled up the hill toward Monito Park, where my son lived in a neighborhood I could never afford. His house sat behind a perfectly manicured lawn, complete with professional landscaping in a circular driveway. 2 cars occupied the space, a new BMW and what looked like a Mercedes SUV, both worth more than my annual pension. I parked on the street and walked up the stone pathway, the loan document folded in my jacket pocket. The doorbell chimed with an expensive melody that echoed through what sounded like a large foyer. Dad. Brian opened the door. "What are you doing here? You should have called first. We need to talk." I stepped past him into the house without waiting for an invitation. Rich hardwood floors stretched beneath my feet, leading to a living room that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-toiling windows, leather furniture, art that actually looked valuable. This wasn't the modest lifestyle of someone living paycheck to paycheck. Brian closed the door slowly, his face already showing signs of nervousness. "Is everything okay? You seem upset." "I got something interesting in the mail today." I pulled out the bank statement, watching his eyes focus on the official letterhead. "Care to explain this?" His face went pale instantly. "Dad, I don't know what that is." $200,000. Brian. A loan I never applied for, with a signature that looks remarkably like mine. I held the paper closer to his face. "The bank confirmed the funds went directly to your account within hours." "There must be some mistake." His voice cracked slightly. "Banks make errors all the time. You know that." But I did know banks better than he realized. 37 years of working with loan documents, signature verification, fraud detection protocols, the nervous way he kept glancing at the stairs, the sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air conditioning. "Stop lying to me." My voice came out harder than I'd intended. "I spoke to customer service. They confirmed you're listed as an emergency contact with account access. You forged my signature and stole $200,000. The silence stretched between us. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. "Dad, you have to understand. Emily has expectations. She's used to a certain lifestyle, and I couldn't disappoint her. You always said family comes first, right? I knew you'd want to help, if you could." "Help?" The word came out as almost a whisper. "This isn't help, Brian. This is theft. This is fraud. This is destroying your father's financial security. But you're not using that credit anyway. You live so simply, and Emily needs Brian." "What's all the shouting about?" Emily appeared at the top of the staircase like she was making a grand entrance. Designer workout clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Perfectly styled hair. Jewelry that caught the morning light streaming through those expensive windows. She descended slowly, taking in the scene with obvious annoyance. "Oh, Robert, you're here." Her tone suggested I was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe. "Emily." I nodded stiffly. Your husband and I were just discussing a loan he took out in my name." She reached the bottom of the stairs and moved to stand beside Brian, her arm slipping through his in a possessive gesture. "Robert, honestly, you're making such a fuss over nothing. You're going to die soon anyway. Why do you need that money?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there staring at this woman who had just casually dismissed my remaining years as worthless, who had looked at me and seen nothing but an obstacle to her comfort. Brian's face showed shock at his wife's bluntness, but he didn't contradict her, didn't defend me, didn't even look ashamed. Something cold settled in my chest, replacing the hot anger I'd carried here. They'd stolen from me, lied to me, and now dismissed my very existence as inconvenient. I folded the loan document carefully and put it back in my pocket. When I looked up, both of them were watching me with the weariness of people who suddenly realized they might have pushed too far. "You're right, Emily." My voice came out calm, almost pleasant. "I probably don't have many years left." Brian straightened, taking confidence from his wife's cruelty. "Dad, you need to understand something here. You raised me to expect support from family. That's what parents do." I watched him pace across their expensive hardwood floors, gesturing with hands that had never known real work, the same hands that had forged my signature. "All those years you promised you'd always be there for me. Remember, you said family comes first, no matter what." His voice gained strength with each word. "I never asked to be born. Dad, you chose to have a child. That comes with responsibilities." The years of paying for college flew by in my head, working 2 shifts at the bank to cover his expenses, cheap lunches so he would have money for social activities, the pride I felt watching him graduate. "Brian's absolutely right, Robert." Emily moved closer to her husband, her arm sliding around his waist in a gesture of united front. Parents sacrifice for their children, not the other way around. That's just natural order. Natural order. I remembered the wedding expenses, $15,000 I'd scraped together from my retirement savings because Emily had to have the perfect venue, the perfect dress, the perfect reception. I'd eaten nothing but soup and sandwiches for months afterward. Brian nodded enthusiastically at his wife's support. "Exactly. And honestly, Dad, you should be grateful we're giving you this opportunity. How many retired people get to feel useful, get to know their money is making a real difference in their family's happiness?" The house down payment came back to me with sharp clarity. $35,000, nearly half my life savings at the time. Brian had called it a temporary loan that we both knew would never be repaid. Emily had picked out the neighborhood, the upgraded kitchen, the master bathroom with marble fixtures. "You're living so simply anyway," Brian continued, warming to his theme. "That tiny apartment, driving that old car. What do you need money for, Emily and I? We have appearances to maintain social obligations. My business colleagues expect a certain lifestyle." What business colleagues? The question formed in my mind. But I didn't voice it. Instead, I listened to my son rewrite history, painting his theft as generosity, his crime as kindness. "The truth is, Dad, you owe me this. After all those years of telling me I was special, that I deserved the best, that you'd always take care of me. Well, here's your chance to prove it." Emily smiled, the expression sharp as broken glass. "Besides, Robert, at your age, what's money compared to knowing you helped your son succeed? You can't take it with you. Can't take it with you." Combined with her earlier comment about my approaching death, the message was crystal clear. They were waiting for me to die, counting on it, planning around it. I thought about the emergency fund I'd maintained for years, The money I'd set aside for unexpected medical expenses, for the possibility of needing care in my final years. They'd stolen my security, my peace of mind, my ability to age with dignity. "We're not asking for charity here," Brian said, his tone becoming almost magnanimous. "We're asking you to be the father you always claimed you wanted to be, the one who puts family first." The manipulation was so complete, so perfectly crafted that I almost admired its artistry. They'd taken my love for my son and weaponized it against me. Used my own words, my own values, to justify their betrayal. Brian stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "So, what's it going to be, Dad? Are you going to support your family, or are you going to be selfish about money you don't even need?" Emily's smile widened. "I'm sure Robert will make the right choice. Won't you, Robert?" I looked at them both, my son and his wife, standing in their beautiful house filled with furniture bought with stolen money, wearing clothes purchased with forged loans, living a life built on the foundation of my destroyed financial security. Something settled deep in my chest, cold and final as winter ice. Monday morning brought 3 envelopes from First National Bank, each one more urgent than the last. I sat at my kitchen table with my reading glasses and my morning coffee, laying out the documents like a general reviewing battle plans. Default notice, collection procedures, foreclosure, warning. The weekend had been quiet, too quiet. I'd spent Saturday and Sunday replaying Brian's words, Emily's cruel smile, the casual way they dismissed my remaining years as worthless. But I'd also been thinking like a banker, analyzing the situation with 40 years of professional experience. Now, the bank was making its move exactly as I had expected. Failure to cure default within 30 calendar days will result in acceleration of the full loan balance and commencement of foreclosure proceedings. The legal language was familiar, almost comforting in its precision. I'd written similar notices myself back when I was the one behind the desk. Monthly payments of band 84733 on a pension of 200. The mathematics were brutal and simple. At 9:30, I walked the 6 blocks to First National Bank, the same building where I'd worked for most of my adult life, where colleagues had thrown me a retirement party just 3 years ago. The lobby looked smaller than I remembered, but the marble floors still echoed the same way. Mr. Anderson, the branch manager's office, felt familiar, though Margaret Wells had only been there 2 years. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Professional courtesy mixed with policy enforcement." I recognized the tone immediately. "Margaret, I need to understand my options here. I have 40 years of banking experience, so please speak frankly." I placed the documents on her desk. "What exactly are we looking at?" She reviewed the file with practiced efficiency. "The loan was properly executed with your signature as co-signer. The primary borrower, your son, has made no payments and hasn't responded to our contact attempts. And my liability full and complete. As co-signer, you're responsible for the entire balance, regardless of circumstances." Her voice carried genuine sympathy. "I understand this is difficult, especially given the family situation." Family situation. Such a clean phrase for betrayal and theft. What about fraud allegations? The signature verification. Margaret pulled up something on her computer screen. Our verification process was followed correctly. The signature matches our samples, and the application was submitted with proper documentation. Of course it did. Brian had 5 years of practice forging my signature on smaller documents. By the time he attempted this masterpiece, he'd perfected the technique. So my options are payment or foreclosure. Essentially, yes, you could pursue civil action against the primary borrower, But that doesn't relieve your obligation to the bank. Civil action against my own son. The irony wasn't lost on me. I walked home slowly, taking the long route past Riverfront Park. The Spokane River moved steadily eastward, indifferent to human troubles. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd made a decision. I called Brian's house. Emily answered on the third ring. "Oh, hello, Robert." Ice crystals could have formed on her words. "Brian's not available. Emily, the bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. I need to speak with him." "Hold on." The phone clattered against something hard. Brian's voice came on after several minutes. "Dad, we already talked about this. That's your problem now. Brian, listen to me carefully. If you don't start making payments, I'm going to lose my home. I'll be living on the street." Well, maybe you should have thought about that before you got so upset about family, helping family. The line went dead. I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at the loan documents spread across my coffee table. Conventional solutions had failed. The bank would follow procedure. Brian would continue to ignore responsibility. Emily would keep spending stolen money on designer clothes and luxury cars. But I had something they didn't expect. 40 years of understanding exactly how financial institutions really worked. Knowledge of systems, procedures, and most importantly, people. The phone rang. Margaret Wells from the bank. "Mr. Anderson, I wanted to let you know we've scheduled a meeting with our legal department for next week. I thought you should be prepared." "Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate the courtesy." After I hung up, I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making notes. Not about payment plans or legal defenses, those were futile now. Instead, I began writing down everything I knew about my son's life, his wife's habits, their finances, their vulnerabilities. Wednesday morning found me at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my old address book. The leather cover worn smooth from 40 years of professional networking. The yellow legal pad from Monday night was covered with names, phone numbers, and carefully drawn connections between people who might help me understand exactly what Brian had done. Elizabeth Dunn picked up on the second ring. "Robert Anderson." "Well, this is a pleasant surprise." Her voice carried the warmth of someone who'd shared countless staff meetings and Christmas parties. "How's retirement treating you?" "Actually, Margaret, I need to ask you a professional favor. Could we meet for coffee this morning? I have some questions about credit applications." She suggested a place downtown, neutral territory where we could speak freely. By 10:30, I was sitting across from the woman who'd started as a teller when I was still a loan officer, both of us gay-haired now, but still sharp. "So what's troubling you, Robert?" I slid a copy of Brian's loan application across the small table. My son applied for a loan using me as co-signer. "I never signed this document." Margaret studied the paperwork with the practiced eye of someone who'd reviewed thousands of applications. "The signature looks consistent with our samples. But Robert, I have to tell you something. Your son has applied here at Commerce Bank several times in the past year." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Several times. 3 applications, all using you as a reference or potential co-signer. We declined them due to inconsistencies in the documentation." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Our handwriting analysis flagged some concerns about signature authenticity. Multiple banks, multiple applications. This wasn't a desperate one-time crime. It was systematic fraud. "Margaret, I need to understand the scope of this. Who else has he approached?" She pulled out her phone and scrolled through something. "I can make some calls within legal boundaries. Give me until this afternoon." By 3 o'clock, I was sitting in Tom Rodriguez's office at Inland Empire Credit Union. Tom had worked fraud investigation for 15 years before moving into credit analysis, and his face grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the documents I'd brought. "Robert, what I'm seeing here fits a pattern we've been tracking across multiple institutions." He turned his computer screen toward me. "These credit reports show applications at 4 different banks over the past 18 months. 4 banks. My pen moved steadily across the legal pad, recording dates, amounts, institutions. The pattern was clear. Brian had been practicing refining his technique, building up to the big score. "The amounts escalate," Tom continued, pointing to specific entries. "Small personal loans at first, then home equity lines. Finally, the large signature loan that went through at First National. What's the total exposure?" Tom's fingers moved across his calculator, including the loan you're liable for. "Nearly $300,000 in applications, about $60,000 in smaller loans that were actually funded. $300,000. Brian hadn't just stolen from me. He'd attempted to steal from banks across eastern Washington, using my identity as his key to the vault. Tom, what would constitute the strongest case for prosecution? Pattern evidence, multiple institutions, escalating amounts, a clear intent to defraud." He printed several pages of credit reports and handed them to me. "These documents show systematic identity theft spanning over a year." I drove home with a manila folder full of evidence that painted a picture I was only beginning to understand. Brian hadn't just forged one signature. He'd built an entire criminal enterprise around stealing my identity. The loan, I discovered, was just the successful culmination of months of attempted fraud. That evening, I organized everything chronologically. Applications denied due to suspicious signatures. Small loans approved before banks became suspicious. The escalating pattern that led to the $200,000 score at my former employer. But something nagged at me as I reviewed the credit reports. Several applications showed a co-likant I didn't recognize, someone named Marcus Webb with an address I didn't know, but a signature that looked remarkably similar to Emily's handwriting. My phone rang. Elizabeth Dunn. "Robert, I made those calls. You need to know something about your daughter-in-law. Emily Anderson has been very busy at several banks around town." I picked up my pen and opened to a fresh page in the legal pad. Friday morning at 11, I parked 3 blocks from Brian's house with a thermos of coffee and my old digital camera. Margaret's phone call had given me exactly what I needed, specific information about Emily's activities at multiple banks, always accompanied by someone named Marcus Webb. The same Marcus Webb, whose signature appeared on several loan applications, whose handwriting looked remarkably similar to Emily's. I'd spent Thursday evening planning this surveillance like any other banking investigation. Routes, timing, equipment, check. 40 years of methodical thinking doesn't disappear just because the subjects happen to be family. Emily emerged from the house at 11:47. She drove the Mercedes, the one purchased with stolen money, toward the upscale shopping district near Riverfront Park. First stop, Nordstrom. I watched from the food court as she examined men's watches in the jewelry department. Expensive ones, the sales associate seemed to know her well, bringing out pieces from the back room. Clearly accustomed to serious purchases, she selected a Tag Heuer watch. The price tag, visible through my camera's zoom lens, showed $2,147, nearly twice my monthly income, spent casually on someone who definitely wasn't her husband. Brian wore a cheap digital watch he'd owned for years. I documented each purchase with photographs. Emily at the register, credit cards in hand, bags being loaded into the Mercedes, money that should have been paying my mortgage, transformed into gifts for her lover. At 2:30, she drove to Jape's, an expensive Italian restaurant downtown. I positioned myself across the street with a clear view through the large windows. He was already waiting at a corner table, mid-30s, well-dressed, conventionally handsome in the way that probably appealed to women like Emily. When she approached, he stood and kissed her. Not the polite kiss of friends, but the intimate embrace of lovers. The gift presentation was theatrical. She made a show of the watch, fastening it around his wrist, while he admired the expensive weight of it. My camera captured everything through the restaurant window, their intimate conversation, her hands on his face, the way she leaned into him when he whispered something that made her laugh. This wasn't a casual affair. It was a full relationship funded entirely by stolen money. "This watch costs more than most people make in months," I heard her say when they stepped outside after their meal. Her voice carried the same arrogant confidence she'd displayed in Brian's living room. His response was equally telling. "You spoil me too much, but I'm not complaining about the lifestyle upgrade." Lifestyle upgrade. My life savings transformed into another man's luxury. They moved to the hotel bar at the Davenport, where she ordered champagne that cost $40 a glass. I sat in the lobby with a newspaper close enough to observe far enough to remain invisible. "My husband's family will never know where this money really goes," Emily said, raising her glass in what looked like a toast to their deception. Marcus, because it had to be Marcus Webb from the loan applications, clink glasses with her to financial freedom, and stupid men who make it possible. I took one final photograph of them together, Emily's wedding ring clearly visible as she caressed her lover's face. Driving home, I reviewed the evidence: banking fraud across multiple institutions, identity theft spanning 18 months, and now the perfect capstone. Brian's wife was using stolen money to fund an elaborate affair with another man. Brian thought he'd won when he hung up on me. Emily believed she'd silence me with her cruel words about my mortality. Neither of them had any idea that while they were celebrating their victory, I'd been building the case that would destroy them both. But this wasn't about legal prosecution anymore. This was about something much more personal, much more satisfying. Monday morning, I spread every piece of evidence across my kitchen table like pieces of a complex puzzle. Bank documents, credit reports, surveillance photographs, contact information from my old address book. Brian hadn't just victimized me. I was certain of it. Linda Martinez answered her phone on the first ring, her voice tight with the stress I recognized immediately. She'd been Brian's neighbor for 5 years, a widow living on Social Security who'd somehow become entangled in my son's web of lies. "Robert Bryans told me so much about you. How are you feeling? He said you'd been having some health issues." Health issues? Another lie, another manipulation. "Linda, I'm fine, but I need to ask you something important. Have you had any financial dealings with Brian recently?" The silence stretched long enough to confirm my suspicions. "Could we meet for coffee this morning? I think we need to compare notes." At the small cafe on Monroe Street, Linda clutched her purse like a shield while I showed her the loan documents. Her face went through the same progression I'd experienced. Confusion, recognition, then burning anger. "He told me you were sick and needed help, but were too proud to ask directly. Said if I co-signed a car loan for him, he'd use the money to pay your medical bills." "How much, Linda?" $18,000. The car was repossessed last month, and now they're saying I owe the full balance." Her voice cracked slightly. "I trusted him because he was your son." We spent an hour comparing stories, the same manipulation tactics, the same false emergencies, the same exploitation of trust and family connections. Linda provided 3 more names, other people Brian had approached with similar sob stories. By Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in the law office of Patricia Stone, a fraud prosecutor who'd left the district attorney's office to handle cases exactly like this one. The conference table was covered with documentation from 5 different victims. Mr. Anderson, in 20 years fraud prosecution, I've rarely seen a case this well documented. She reviewed the photographs from Emily's shopping spree, the banking records, the testimony from multiple victims. Your background in banking shows in every detail. What are our options? Criminal fraud charges are almost certain with this evidence, but I'm more interested in the civil recovery potential. She pulled out a calculator. If we can demonstrate a pattern of systematic fraud across multiple victims, we can seek asset forfeit, wage garnishment, and full restitution. Asset forfeit. Dude. Brian's house, Emily's jewelry, Marcus's expensive gifts. Everything purchased with stolen money could be seized and sold to compensate victims. The key is coordination, Patricia continued. Individual cases are weak, but collective evidence creates an overwhelming narrative of deliberate criminal enterprise. Wednesday evening found us in a community center meeting room. 7 victims, ages ranging from 35 to 78, each representing a different facet of Brian's systematic deception. Tom, my former colleague, who'd lent Brian $5,000 for a fake emergency. Sarah Williams, who'd guaranteed Brian's apartment lease and was now facing eviction proceedings. I stood at a whiteboard organizing the timeline like any banking project I'd ever managed. What we're seeing here isn't random financial irresponsibility, I explained, pointing to dates and amounts. This is a calculated criminal enterprise spanning 3 years and targeting specific demographics. Elderly neighbors, family friends, professional contacts who trusted the Anderson family name. Each victim shared their story, the same techniques, the same emotional manipulation, the same as exploitation of trust. Brian had systematically identified vulnerable people in his social circle and constructed elaborate lies designed to extract maximum financial benefit. He told me his father was dying and needed experimental treatment, said Mrs. Patterson, an 80-year-old church member who'd mortgaged her home to help. Said the family was too proud to ask for charity. The beautiful thing about our situation, I continued, is that Brian and Emily have no idea we've connected. They think they're dealing with isolated, defeated victims. Instead, they're facing a coordinated coalition with comprehensive evidence and legal representation. Patricia nodded approvingly. With this level of documentation and victim testimony, we're looking at federal wire fraud charges, identity theft, elder abuse, and potentially RICO violations if we can demonstrate organized criminal enterprise. The energy in the room shifted palpably. These weren't defeated victims anymore. They were witnesses in a major criminal case backed by overwhelming evidence and professional legal counsel. So, what's our next step? Asked Tom. I looked around the room at the faces of people whose lives Brian had damaged, whose trust he'd betrayed, whose financial security he'd destroyed for his own selfish purposes. Wednesday afternoon at 2:00, my phone rang with an urgency that cut through the quiet of my apartment like a fire alarm. Brian's voice, tight with barely controlled panic, demanded immediate attention. Dad, we need to talk right now. No pleasantries, no pretense of familiar warmth. You're making a big mistake with these people you've been calling. So, he knew. I'd wondered how long it would take for word to reach him through Spokane's interconnected banking community. Apparently, 24 hours was all it took for my son to discover that his victims had found each other. What people, Brian? Don't play games with me. I know what you're doing. Gathering these folks, filling their heads with lies about me. It stops today. The threat was implicit but clear. Brian thought he could intimidate me back into silence, the way he'd silenced me with Emily's cruel words about my mortality. He had no idea how much that strategy had already backfired. "I'll meet you at Romano's in an hour," I said calmly. "We can discuss this like adults." Romano's was perfect, public, well lit, with enough ambient noise to prevent eavesdropping, but quiet enough for serious conversation. Most importantly, it would force Brian to moderate his behavior in front of witnesses. He was already seated when I arrived, positioned at a corner table that gave him a view of the entire restaurant. Controlled tactics, probably something he'd learned from Emily. His designer shirt and expensive watch, both purchased with stolen money, projected success and confidence. But his clenched jaw and restless fingers told a different story. "You think you're so smart, gathering these people against me?" he began before I'd even sat down. "You have no idea what you're playing with here." I placed my briefcase beside my chair and studied my son's face. Desperation was written in the tight lines around his eyes, the forced aggression in his posture. This wasn't the confident young man who dismissed my financial ruin 2 weeks ago. "I'm not gathering anyone, Brian. I'm simply sharing information with people who ask questions about their own financial situations." "Information?" His voice rose slightly, then dropped as he remembered where we were. "You mean lies? Stories designed to make me look bad? Bank records aren't stories, son. Credit reports aren't lies. Signature analysis isn't subject to interpretation." Something flickered across his face, surprised that I knew about the signature analysis. He'd underestimated his father's connections in the banking community, just as he'd underestimated everything else about this situation. Emily appeared at our table like a theatrical entrance, wearing the same false warmth she'd displayed in their living room. Her timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Clearly this was a coordinated strategy. "Robert," she slid under the chair beside Brian, her hand immediately finding his arm in a gesture of united support. "I'm so glad we can finally talk this through like family." "Family?" The word felt like mockery coming from someone who'd used my stolen money to buy expensive gifts for her lover. "Surely we can work something out," she continued, her voice pitched to carry reasonable concern rather than desperation. "Families shouldn't fight like this, especially over money." "Emily's right, Dad. We've all made mistakes here, but we can fix this." Brian leaned forward, attempting sincerity. "What if we could reduce your debt by half? Would that help everyone move forward?" "Reduce my debt?" As if the money he'd stolen belonged to him. As if offering to return part of it constituted generosity rather than continued theft. "That's very interesting," I said carefully. "But I'm afraid that ship has sailed. There are complications you're not aware of." Brian and Emily exchanged glances. They were fishing for information, trying to determine exactly what I knew and how much damage I could cause. They had no idea that while they'd been celebrating their theft, I'd been building a case that would destroy everything they'd built with stolen money. What kind of complications? Emily's voice carried the first note of genuine concern I'd heard from her. I smiled politely and checked my watch, the kind that require legal expertise to resolve properly. "I'm sure you'll understand soon enough." Brian's mask slipped completely. "You can't be serious about pressing charges. I am your son." "Yes," I said quietly, "you are, and that makes what you've done even more unforgivable." The silence stretched between us like a chasm that had been years in the making. Finally, Brian stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his water glass. "This isn't over, Dad. You have no idea what you're starting here." "I think there's something you both need to see," I said quietly, reaching for my phone, "about how that loan money is really being spent." Brian leaned forward with the confidence of someone who believed his wife's financial activities were beyond reproach. Emily's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught the slightest tightening around her eyes. The first photograph filled my phone screen with perfect clarity. Emily and Marcus at Joeppe's restaurant, his hand caressing her face while she smiled with unmistakable intimacy. Brian's face went completely white. "Emily, what is this? Who is that man?" I swiped to the next image. Emily fastening the expensive watch around Marcus's wrist, both of them laughing like lovers sharing a private joke. Then another. Emily's hands running over the Italian suits she'd bought him, wedding ring clearly visible as she touched another man. "This is where your loan went, Brian. $2,147 for that watch. Another $1,500 for the suits. Champagne at $40 a glass while I'm facing foreclosure." Emily's shock lasted exactly 3 seconds before her survival instincts activated with surgical precision. "Robert, this is pathetic." Her voice carried perfect incredule, mixed with concern. "These are obviously fake photos. Anyone can doctor images these days." Brian stared at the phone screen, his breathing shallow. "But Emily, that looks like that's your watch, the one you wear every day. Honey, don't you see what's happening here?" Emily's hand found Brian's arm, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Your father is desperate. He's fabricated these images because he can't accept responsibility for his own financial situation." "I took these photographs myself," I said calmly. "Friday afternoon at Yepes, then at the Davenport Hotel bar. Your wife spent stolen money on her lover while telling you it was for family expenses." Emily's eyes flashed with calculated indignation. "You've been stalking me, following me around town like some kind of disturbed person." She turned to Brian, her voice breaking with perfect theatrical emotion. "This is harassment, honey. He's clearly lost his mind." Brian looked between the phone and his wife, desperation written across his features. "Dad, this could be anyone. The photos aren't clear enough to be certain. The images were absolutely clear. Marcus's face was distinct, Emily's features unmistakable, the expensive gifts clearly visible. But I watched my son's expression and understood that clarity meant nothing when confronted with a truth too devastating to accept." "Emily's right," Brian continued, his voice gaining strength as he chose comfortable lies over painful reality. "You've obviously doctored these somehow." "This is crazy, Dad." Emily pressed her advantage with the skill of a master manipulator. "Robert, I understand you're facing financial pressure, but fabricating evidence and making wild accusations won't solve anything. You need help." She made it sound like concern for my mental health, rather than deflection of overwhelming evidence. Her performance was flawless, just enough wounded dignity mixed with compassionate worry to make Brian doubt what his own eyes had shown him. "The man's name is Marcus Webb," I said quietly. "The same Marcus Webb whose signature appears on several loan applications with forged information. Your wife has been running a systematic fraud operation while maintaining an expensive affair. Stop it." Brian's voice cracked with genuine anguish. "Just stop making things up about Emily. She's the only person who stood by me through all this." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something that broke what remained of my faith in family redemption. Brian wasn't confused or deceived. Some part of him knew the truth, saw the evidence, understood exactly what Emily was doing. But he was choosing to believe her lies because the alternative meant confronting not just her betrayal, but his own complete failure as a husband and son. Emily watched this realization cross my face and smiled with cold satisfaction. "I think this conversation is over," she said softly. "Robert, we'll pray for your recovery." I put my phone away and stood up slowly, looking down at both of them. My son, who chose comfortable lies over devastating truth, and his wife, who just demonstrated that skillful manipulation could defeat even photographic evidence. I felt something final settle in my chest. "You're right, Emily," I said quietly. "This conversation is definitely over." As I walked toward the restaurant door, I could hear Emily's voice behind me already weaving new stories, new explanations, new reasons why Brian should never believe anything his disturbed father might claim. Thursday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, I sat across from Patricia Stone's desk with 3 manila folders containing the most comprehensive fraud case she'd ever seen. I'd spent the sleepless night organizing evidence with the same methodical precision I'd once used for major banking projects. "Robert, this documentation is extraordinary." Patricia reviewed the surveillance photographs, banking records, and victim testimonies with growing amazement. "I've never seen a civilian investigation this thorough. We can file criminal charges for fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation of the elderly. What about asset recovery? With this evidence, we can freeze their accounts, pursue wage garnishment, and seek full restitution plus damages." She pulled out a legal pad and began calculating, including interest in legal fees. "We're looking at potential recovery of $400,000. £400,000 more than they'd stolen, enough to compensate every victim and establish a clear message about consequences. How quickly can we move? Criminal charges this afternoon. Civil suit by tomorrow morning. With the coalition of victims, this becomes a major prosecution case." Patricia smiled with professional satisfaction. They picked the wrong person to defraud. By noon, criminal fraud charges had been filed with the Spokane County District Attorney's Office, multiple counts of identity theft, financial fraud, and elder abuse. The legal machinery was now in motion, and Brian would soon discover that legal consequences were far more serious than family disappointment. But criminal charges were only the beginning. From the courthouse, I drove to Emily's workplace, a marketing firm downtown, where she held a position that required public trust and professional integrity. I walked into the reception area carrying a sealed envelope addressed to the Human Resources Director. "Could you ensure Miss Anderson's supervisor receives this immediately? It contains information relevant to her employment." The envelope contained printed copies of the surveillance photographs along with a professional summary explaining how Emily had used fraudulently obtained funds to maintain an extramarital affair. Companies take ethics violations seriously, especially when they involve criminal activity. Next, I visited the local print shop where I had prepared a small mailing project, 27 envelopes, each containing copies of the restaurant photographs and a brief explanation of the circumstances. The addresses included Emily's parents, her sister, her college friends, and several prominent members of her social circle. Social reputation takes years to build and minutes to destroy. Emily had chosen to attack mine through cruel dismissal of my remaining years. I was simply returning the favor through factual documentation of her choices. The final stop was Brian's apartment complex, where I left an envelope with the building manager. Brian's lease had been guaranteed by Mrs. Patterson, the elderly church member he'd manipulated into mortgaging her home. She deserved to know exactly what her guarantee had enabled. By Friday morning, Emily's world began collapsing with mathematical precision. Her supervisor called an emergency meeting to discuss serious allegations affecting professional conduct. Her parents left increasingly frantic voicemails demanding explanations for disturbing photographs they'd received in the mail. 3 longtime friends blocked her on social media after receiving evidence packages. Brian's panicked phone call came at 10:30. "Dad, what have you done? The police want to question me about fraud charges." "Emily's been suspended from work pending investigation. People are saying terrible things about us. I've done exactly what any fraud victim should do. Seek justice through proper legal channels. This is insane. You're destroying our lives over money." "No, Brian. You destroyed your lives when you chose to steal from your father and 7 other people. I'm simply ensuring appropriate consequences." Emily called an hour later, her voice cracking with desperation I'd never heard before. "Robert, please, you have to stop this. I'm going to lose my job. My friends won't talk to me. My family thinks I'm some kind of criminal. This is destroying everything I've worked for. You should have considered those consequences before you decided to fund your affair with stolen money. Those photographs, they're taken out of context. You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. You used money stolen from your husband's elderly father to buy expensive gifts for your lover. The context is quite clear. The line went quiet except for the sound of crying. Real tears, not the theatrical emotion she displayed during our restaurant confrontation. What do you want? What will it take to make you stop? I considered the question seriously. What did I want? Justice for the victims, restitution for the financial damage, consequences for the betrayal of trust. None of those things required mercy toward people who'd shown none to their victims. I want you to experience exactly what you put 7 elderly people through: financial insecurity, social embarrassment, and the complete destruction of the life you thought was secure. That's cruel." "Yes," I said quietly, "it is." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and reviewed the week's accomplishments. Criminal charges filed, civil suits initiated, professional reputation destroyed, social circles collapsed, bank accounts frozen. Saturday morning brought the quiet satisfaction of reading about my case in the Spokesman Review's weekend edition. Local banking executive leads major fraud investigation. Read the headline accompanied by details about the 7-victim coalition and the systematic nature of the crimes. I was savoring my coffee and the professional recognition when Brian's call shattered the peaceful morning. "Dad, Emily left me." His voice cracked with genuine anguish. "She packed her things this morning and moved out. Everything's falling apart. I need your help." Through the phone, I could hear the sound of drawers being slammed, papers rustling, the chaos of a life disintegrating in real time. "I'm not surprised," I replied calmly. "The consequences of fraud tend to compound rapidly." She admitted everything when she left about Marcus, about the money, about all of it. She said, "You were right, but that staying with me would destroy her career completely." Brian's breathing was labored, panicked. "Dad, I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm your son. Please help me." Your son. The same phrase he'd used to justify theft, to demand forgiveness, to manipulate my emotions. But that currency had been completely devalued by weeks of lies and betrayal. You chose Emily and comfortable lies over truth and family. Brian, these are simply the natural consequences of those choices. The police questioned me yesterday about the fraud charges. My lawyer says I could face 5 years in prison. My accounts are frozen. I can't pay rent. And now Emily's gone too. His voice broke completely. I was wrong about those photographs. She told me everything before she left. How Marcus has money. How he can give her the life she wants without all this legal trouble. 5 years in prison, aset for fate, social isolation, professional ruin. The systematic pressure campaign was working exactly as designed. That information might have mattered weeks ago, Brian. It's too late now. Please, Dad. There has to be something we can do. Some way to fix this. I'll do anything. 45 minutes later, Brian stood at my apartment door looking like he'd aged 5 years and 5 days. His designer clothes were wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his confident posture replaced by the slumped shoulders of complete defeat. "Can I come in just for a few minutes?" I stepped aside, watching him take in my modest apartment, the same small space he'd once dismissed, as evidence of my failure to achieve the lifestyle he deserved. "Dad, I need you to understand something." Emily wasn't just having an affair. She was planning this whole thing, the loans, the money, even marrying me. It was all part of some scheme with Marcus. Brian sat heavily on my couch, his hands shaking. "She used me to get access to your information, your accounts, your signature. I was just as much a victim as you were. Still making excuses, still positioning himself as a victim rather than accepting responsibility for his choices. Brian, you forged my signature on loan documents. You stole money from 7 elderly people. You chose to believe Emily's lies, even when presented with photographic evidence. Those weren't things that happened to you. Those were choices you made. But I thought I was helping family. Emily convinced me you needed the money but were too proud to ask. She said the other people were investments, business opportunities that would pay everyone back with interest. And you never questioned why these investments required forged signatures and false identities." His silence stretched long enough to answer the question. "I was stupid. I was weak. I let Emily manipulate me because I wanted to believe her lies were true." Brian looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "But I'm trying to make it right now. I'll testify against her. Help the prosecution do whatever it takes to fix this. The prosecution already has everything they need. Your cooperation wouldn't change the charges against you. Then what can I do? What will it take for you to forgive me?" Forgiveness, as if 2 weeks of consequences could undo 3 years of systematic fraud and betrayal. As if saying sorry could restore the trust he'd deliberately shattered, the security he'd stolen, the family bonds he'd severed with calculated cruelty. You can face the consequences of your choices like an adult. Brian, you can stop looking for someone else to blame or rescue you. You can accept that actions have results and yours have destroyed everything you claimed to value. I walked to the door and opened it. "But Dad, the conversation is over. The family relationship is over. The only thing left now is letting the legal system finish what you started when you decided to steal from your father." Brian stood slowly, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of broken acceptance. "I love you, Dad, despite everything. I love you. Love without respect, loyalty, or honesty isn't love, Brian. It's just words people use when they want something." After he left, I sat back down with my newspaper and finished reading about the case. Patricia Stone had given an excellent interview about the importance of systematic evidence collection in fraud prosecution. The phone rang again. This time it was Patricia herself. Friday morning, April 12th. I stood on the steps of Spokane County Courthouse, wearing my best suit and carrying the briefcase that had accompanied me through 40 years of banking and 2 weeks of legal warfare. Patricia Stone waited beside me, her confidence as professional and polished as mine. "Are you ready for this, Robert?" she asked. adjusting her own legal materials. "I've been ready since March 15th, I replied quietly. "Today we simply collect what the system owes us." Inside the courthouse, the coalition of victims had assembled in the gallery. Linda Martinez, Tom, Sarah Williams, Mrs. Patterson, and 3 others whose lives Brian had disrupted with his systematic fraud. They nodded respectfully as I passed, understanding that my methodical approach had made their justice possible. Brian sat alone at the defendant's table, his public defender shuffling through papers with the resigned efficiency of someone managing an unwinnable case. He looked older, thinner, diminished by 2 weeks of facing consequences without Emily's manipulative support or my paternal protection. Judge Harrison entered with the gravity befitting a criminal fraud case that had drawn media attention throughout eastern Washington. The evidence I'd compiled, the coalition I'd organized, and the systematic prosecution we'd built had become a textbook example of how fraud victims could effectively seek justice. "Mr. Anderson," the judge addressed Brian directly, "you have been charged with multiple counts of identity theft, bank fraud, and financial exploitation of elderly victims. How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor." Brian's voice carried no defiance, no manipulation, no attempt to deflect responsibility. 2 weeks of isolation had finally taught him what 40 years of parenting had failed to accomplish. Patricia Stone stood to address the court. "Your Honor, the prosecution wishes to acknowledge the extraordinary cooperation of Mr. Robert Anderson, whose professional expertise and systematic evidence collection made this prosecution possible. The defendant defrayed 7 victims of over $300,000 using forged signatures and false identities." The judge reviewed the evidence methodically: bank documents, signature analyses, victim testimonies, surveillance photographs. Everything I'd collected during weeks of professional investigation was now part of the legal record, validated by the justice system I'd trusted to deliver appropriate consequences. "Mr. Brian Anderson, the court sentences you to 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and full financial restitution to all victims." Judge Harrison's voice carried the weight of institutional authority. "You will surrender all assets for liquidation, and your wages will be garnished until complete repayment is achieved. $300,000 in restitution, asset forfeit, permanent criminal record, complete financial ruin." The systematic pressure campaign had achieved exactly the results I'd calculated when I first opened that manila envelope 6 months ago. Outside the courthouse, local news reporters gathered around our small group of victims. I spoke briefly, choosing my words with the same precision I'd once used for banking presentations. Justice has been served through proper legal channels. The system works when citizens use it professionally and systematically. I hope this case demonstrates that financial fraud, even within families, carries serious consequences. Patricia Stone handled the technical questions about asset recovery and enforcement procedures. Within 60 days, Brian's house would be sold, his possessions liquidated, his future earnings monitored by court-appointed officials. The mathematical precision satisfied something deep in my professional soul. Linda Martinez approached me as the reporters dispersed. "Robert, I can never thank you enough. Without your organization and expertise, I would have lost my home and had no recourse. The system exists to protect people like us, Linda. We simply had to use it correctly." Driving home alone, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred over 8 weeks. I'd entered this crisis as a victim, elderly, financially vulnerable, betrayed by the son I'd raised and supported. I was leaving it as something else entirely. A successful prosecutor who demonstrated that systematic thinking could triumph over emotional manipulation, that professional methodology could defeat personal betrayal. The evening news would lead with our story. Retired banker leads coalition to justice in major fraud case. The headline pleased me not for personal recognition, but for what it represented. Validation that the banking principles I'd spent my career applying could solve even the most personal problems when applied with sufficient rigor and determination. Brian would spend the next several years rebuilding his life from nothing, learning to support himself without stealing from others or depending on manipulative relationships. Emily had escaped legal consequences by abandoning him, but she'd lost her career, her social standing, and any claim to respectability. Marcus could support her financially, but he couldn't restore the reputation she'd destroyed. As for me, I sat in my modest apartment that evening, reading correspondence from other fraud victims who'd heard about our case and wanted advice on organizing their own coalitions. The system had not only delivered justice, it had demonstrated a replicable methodologies for other victims to follow. My phone rang one final time. Patricia Stone with news about asset liquidation schedules and payment distributions. Professional conversations about professional results, achieved through professional methods. Trust, once broken, cannot be repaired, but justice, when pursued systematically and professionally, can always be achieved. The system had worked exactly as designed. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.